could go back into Richard Harness's version of archetypal astrology, which is, it's different than, I mean, he's sort of fusing Carl Jung's psychology with a traditional astrological view. So he sees planets as representatives of, or representations of archetypes, right? And I think it's important to distinguish an archetypally astrological worldview from, say, a deterministic, astrological worldview where it's as though the planets actually cause what happens on Earth. Whereas, like you were saying before, it seems that they resonate with certain patterns in your experience. They don't cause these patterns. They're just reflections of them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Richard Tarnas, I would say, like you were talking about, the most practical use for it, and I think Richard Tarnas completely captured it. Like, well, the use of it is to see that, well, during Saturn-Pluto conjunctions, we should, try and be nicer to people, or just not revolt or something.
Right, or just be aware of that possibility that we'll have that tendency, right?
Totally. I think Tarnas, all he doesn't take into consideration is the exact zodiacal placements. He takes strictly just the planets, which is kind of interesting, I think. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter if it's in Capricorn or Leo, like, it's just the planets in him, which I think he should actually study a little more.
This would be a good way to segue into Nietzsche a little bit more, where I think of him as a philosopher who was able to continually achieve philosophical insight, which brought the opposites together into some new, revealed truth which wasn't there before. Instead of siding on one side or the other, he would work with he would struggle with the opposites and produce insights that way, right?
That's why it's so awesome that he was a Libra, the judge, the scales. He said himself he was the first real opposition. So a number of writings are like, well, if I did this and this would happen, if I did that, then that might happen. He had true, dead philosophical statements, but oftentimes people are left, well, which one should I choose?
Right.
I think the combining of opposites is essential. Like I said earlier, Fridtjof Capra, he wrote the Tao of Physics. The whole thing is pretty much about how we're still in the masculine yang mentality. We need to be a little more sensitive to nature and the earth around us with yin mentality.
Right.
What do you think of the metaphor? We're talking about the coming together of opposites, which, I mean, that's intercourse and childbirth. That's essentially what it is. Coming together of opposites, polarities, to make something new, create something. In fact, I think I just read somewhere that was the key to creation is this prehension of opposites that come through for this bang, boom, and then out of that some new creative entity is coming, whether it's conceptual, whether it's physical, or it's psychophysical, or both. Yeah. It just seems like the act of creation, as far as we've seen, seems to be the perfect metaphor. You can go with that if you want to go further.
It was Heraclitus that said strife is the father of all things. Sort of the war of opposites is what generates life and creativity.
Yeah, Nietzsche loved him because he was all about fluctuation. Wasn't he the first to say, don't step in the same river twice?
Ben, you said you wanted to talk a little bit about Nietzsche as the Antichrist, right?
Yeah, I kind of mentioned it earlier. I mean, if you go to that teachinghearts.org, the website, it's just a dictionary of all these religious, definitions. And the very first thing is just a number. So it's 1844, the year of the prophecy return. And it just has a huge list of all these different cultures who believe that around the 1840s, someone would come down or be born.
Right.
And since Nietzsche declared that he was the Antichrist specifically, I don't believe it was a pun, even though it was in a humorous tone. I mean, he has to be sort of lighthearted because he knew his shit was so heavy. So, I mean, not only is it the return of Quetzalcoatl, who is supposed to sort of be a Mayan reincarnation from the center of the Milky Way galaxy. I don't know. I mean, that's what's really odd about the Mayans in general, is that when they came down, they had their mathematics already placed out. There was no sign of actual study. And that's why people are kind of like weirded out that they're at 1/10,000th of a day more accurate than the Gregorian calendar. And what I think Nietzsche was potentially a Mayan prophet reincarnated. But, I mean, since he did try and create a revaluation of all values, I mean, who's to say that, I mean, no one else has put that pressure on their shoulders. Mm-hmm. And since he was born that same year, who knows?
Maybe we could discuss Nietzsche's criticism of Christianity, just in case he was being metaphorical when he called himself the Antichrist, saying that this is, I'm calling myself that because I've criticized Christianity as just a slave morality or whatever. Mm. What do you think is really valid about Nietzsche's criticism of Christianity? Because I think, I'll give my perspective briefly. When he criticizes Buddhism for being kind of world-denying and just not really dealing with the will to power and to live and the Superman urge.
Uberman.
The Ubermensch. I think he's right to criticize Buddhism for that reason. But then I almost see Nietzsche embodying this sort of Christian stream that does emphasize the will. And, he would criticize belief all day of whatever kind. He's, you've made a video recently where he said we should embrace uncertainty. But in terms of faith, I always think of faith as an act of will. And so Nietzsche's will to recreate his humanity at a higher level, that takes faith in not only oneself, but in nature, in the nature of things, right? So I see Nietzsche as embodying this sort of Christian spirit, though he criticized its morality, or at least the way its morality has been interpreted.
Oh, totally.
So what do you think about that? Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, he says that the church is exactly what Jesus preached against and what he taught his disciples to fight. Now, what that implies is that he did agree with some notions of Jesus, and the fact that you said he kind of embodied that sort of fanatical zeal that religion has. I mean, yes. Ironically, in the last unpublished work, which I believe he wrote, my sister and I, which everyone else doesn't think he wrote, he says in it that my Zarathustra power was merely Jehovah in disguise. And in his autobiography, Ichi Homo, he says that he talks about inspiration as being something that you can't control and that he didn't have any choice. And I call that God. When you don't have a choice and you know that something's just being channeled through you. Right. Like he wrote his best work, Zarathustra, during the Triple Conjunction of 1885. I mean, it was just a perfect time to channel that kind of energy. Neptune, Saturn, and
perhaps
Uranus.
Perhaps he's a prophet, not the Antichrist.
Ben, would you say that Nietzsche understood Christianity, had a better grasp of it than most Christians? Would you go that far, or what's your position on that?
Did Nietzsche have a better grasp of Christ than most Christians?
On Christianity, yeah. What's it mean to be a Christian than a lot of Christians at the time, or even today, maybe? Do you think that's true?
What he says in the Antichrist book, he says that Buddhism is 100 times more realistic than Christianity because it takes the body into account. And I mean, Christianity just says everything's a sin, and so how are you supposed to live life like that? How are you supposed to even have kids? Yeah. So I mean, Nietzsche wasn't a Buddhist, but he did recognize that all that kind of meditation was good for your body, and you shouldn't be scared of your body, despite how weird it is. Mm-hmm. And Christianity he believes it's a herd mentality because it's commandments, not like recommendations.
Right. Well, it seems like that's the criticism of Christianity as slave mentality or slave morality or a herd mentality, or criticizing it for being unrealistic. I think that's, well, I mean, the commandments, that's the Jewish tradition, right? And then Christ is supposed to, ideally add something to that tradition, which is, it's what's in your heart. It's not you agreeing to some law that's been set because you're afraid of the consequences of disobeying it.
It's very ironic, you're right.
Right. Christ was saying, no, it's what's in your heart that counts. It's not just your outward behavior.
Christ was such a narcissist.
Well,
just saying. No.
Yeah.
Well, I and the follower are one. Doesn't get much more. Yeah.
I want to say one thing about Christ real quick.